Afternoon, everybody. Today, once again, we're coming back to events in the Soviet Union in the winter of 1941 going into 1942. As I mentioned in previous posts, this was an extremely dangerous time for the Soviet Union. At this point, Leningrad was actually screaming to Moscow, saying, "Please, we've been under siege now for a couple of months. Can you please send something, a way to break this siege that we're under?" And Moscow and Stalin, he specifically pretty much just said flatly, "We'll be lucky if we hold on to Moscow, much less be able to send relief to you." That was the dangerous situation that the Soviet capital was in at that point. And so Leningrad was pretty much left on their own. There was nothing they could do about it. So they've been going into food rationing, so to control the city's food supplies. And everyone had ration cards, which they still had in the Soviet Union for a long period of time, but they were used this way where the larger portions of the food, I'm not going to do the kilograms, that's way too much and it's tedious, but the larger portions of food were given to the factory workers, the one building the munitions, the one keeping the place going. The next largest portion went to those civil workers. The next lowest portion went to the civilians and non-combatants, like the elderly and many of the children. And even then, the food began running out horribly, to where starvation really began setting in, to where there began to be many, many people dying in Leningrad during that first winter. Over 100,000 very quickly died from hunger. And as horrible as it is, there were some, not all, not even a majority of the people of Leningrad, but there were some who actually resorted to cannibalism. To where there were some gangs that were set up to to capture people for the sake of eating them. And first the commissars they were going to execute any of these guys on sight. But the fact that in the beginning, the first weekend, I believe in February of 42, they had probably about 6 or 7 that they shot. By the end of the month, they shot over 300 people for cannibalism. So the situation quickly became a pandemic. And so it got to where, people didn't leave the house by themselves, and you sure as heck did not let the kids out of the house by themselves, because quite frankly, they were disappearing. And so there was mass starvations in Leningrad, and people were dying by the thousands every single day. But that's what Hitler decided to do with Leningrad. He wanted it starved into submission. And so that was some of the things that were happening with Leningrad at that point, while the rest of the country was just trying to keep from being overrun. Meanwhile, as the Red Army in Moscow was able to stop the stop the Blitz, Stalin issued a series of counterattacks, but they were sloppily done, and he was still micromanaging the army at that time. So it didn't really go that well for them, because Stalin would not let his generals do his job. So you'll see how coming down the pipe that will begin to change, and how that will affect both him and also how it will affect how Hitler manages the war. So more on that to come.